All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dr. Michael Walls. I am the national president of AMSA, or the American Medical Student Association. I've been in the role for about a month and a half. And this is going to be our first of hopefully many live streams talking about reproductive health and abortion access. Um, in terms of our reproductive health project, this is one of our biggest projects where we have live stream events. We have a reproductive health institute. We have our mentorship sprint where we connect medical students and trainees with policymakers and abortion providers to really learn about, what abortion is and why it's so important and why we consider it to be such an integral part of healthcare in general. So today we're going to be hearing from Heather Booth, who I will do a little bit of an introduction in a minute. And then we also have a panel of medical students who are all AMSA members. So we'll have Anna Hindman. She's our Gender and Sexuality Action Committee coordinator. We have Stephanie Moody Geisler, our Global Health Action Committee advocacy coordinator. Nikita Balaji is our Gender and Sexuality LGBTQ plus health coordinator. And then we also have Avanti Jayawira. She's our graduate trustee and is a second year family medicine resident at UNC Chapel Hill. And then finally, Oak Sunfist is our education and advocacy fellow. But before we really get into it, just a brief introduction about Heather Booth. So Heather Booth is one of the country's leading strategists about progressive issues. She started organizing in the civil rights and women's movement of the 1960s, and she started JANE, an underground abortion service, in 1965 before Roe v. Wade. She has directed and consulted with a wide array of groups, including NAACP, immigration reform, marriage equality, preserving and expanding Social Security, financial reform, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, taxing the wealthiest, healthcare reform, and more. She started a leading training center for organizers, Midwest Academy. She has also been involved in many elections and was the training director of the Democratic National Committee and also the progressive and senior outreach director for the Biden campaign. There's also a film about her life in organizing titled Heather Booth, Changing the World. It has been shown on PBS and World Channel stations around the country. She was recently featured in a documentary about the underground abortion service in an HBO film called The Janes, and was portrayed as a composite character in a film with Sigourney Weaver named Call Jane. So I will put the slides up and turn it over to Heather Booth. We're so glad you could join us.
Let me see if I'm on now. Well, thank you. Both thank you for the introduction, Michael, but mostly thank you for your incredible leadership. You really are the embodiment of just what we need for the future of good medical practice, of dynamic youth leadership, taking on these roles in the movement for the future. I particularly also want to thank Becky Martin, who is staffing AMSA. And I don't think there could be a better staffer from any place with any other background. She is just a total delight. And the people I really, though, want to thank, and the reason that I've come onto this call is I want to thank you, all the people who are watching this, who are live streaming it, who are in the virtual audiences around the country. You are the future for both the medical establishment, you will soon be the establishment, and hopefully changing it, and also for reproductive health in this country. And more than that, for our hope for democracy and justice. You should know that all of you have power to shape the future. So much in the society tells us you don't know enough, you shouldn't be talking too much, you should know your place. But in fact, we do need your voice, we do need your power. And then I move now to the first slide, because if we organize, We have changed this world, and when we organize, on the first slide, we can change this world. I first learned this in Mississippi in 1964, the next slide, and that was a summer project in which Northern students were recruited to support the very courageous efforts of African Americans who were registering to vote in the South, even in a time of terror. And many of you may have heard about the summer project. I was recruited as a Northern student that came down with other volunteers. And you may have heard about the project because 3 of those young volunteers, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner, were killed at the hands of the Klan. But even in that time of terror, even when people faced horrific conditions, because people organized, within a year we had a Voting Rights Act. And I learned that key lesson that when we organize, that's the way we change this world. On the next slide, this is a picture of me. I'm 18 years old, and I'm supporting these courageous African-American Mississippians who are trying to register to vote. And the picture was taken moments before I was arrested by a sheriff who was trying to shut down the voter registration drive. And I learned another lesson there that's relevant to the work that many of you will be doing, and that is that sometimes we need to stand up to illegitimate authority. In the next slide. This is a picture of me again at 18. I'm in Rollville, Mississippi. The woman right in the middle of the picture is Fannie Lou Hamer with 2 of her friends in front of her house in Rollville. And if you don't know the story of Fannie Lou Hamer, you should look it up. She really is a champion and a heroine. She was a sharecropper, and she worked on someone else's land and barely making enough to support herself and her family. And one day she said she was going to register to vote. And the owner of the land said, if you register to vote, we're going to throw you off the land. And she said, I'm not registering for you, I'm registering for myself. Another thing she said is that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. She went to register to vote, was beaten by the sheriff, and as a result, she was lame for most of the rest of her life. But because she organized, there was greater freedom, and there were more African-American elected officials in Mississippi than any other state in this country, making progress because people organized. And the next slide. We now know that many of these rights are under attack. These freedoms are under attack. See Freddie Gray and Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown. We know about George Floyd and so many others' names that we may not even know. But when we organize, we have changed this world. And even now in these challenging times, we will change this world. Go to the next slide. I returned to my campus in 1965 and in Chicago. And a friend of mine said his sister was pregnant and nearly suicidal, not ready to have a child, and was looking for someone to perform an abortion. It's hard to remember, but in those days, we barely talked about sex. We had just won the right to have contraception. And I don't recall talking about abortion. We knew there were some people who had performed either self-abortions or had gone to the mob for abortions when they weren't legal. And 3 people talking about having an abortion was a conspiracy to commit a felony. But my friend said his sister was in need, and I thought I would do an act of kindness. I really didn't look at it as a political act. I looked at it as a part of the golden rule, to treat someone else as I'd want to be treated. And I've never had to face the issue of abortion, but this was, I'd want someone to do for me if I felt beside myself, not knowing what to do. So I reached out to the Medical Committee for Civil Rights, for Human Rights, the medical arm of the Civil Rights Movement. And I found a Dr. T.R.M. Howard, and his name should also be known. I didn't know it at the time, but he had been a civil rights leader in Mississippi, African-American leader, when his name was put on a Klan death list because he was arguing for the investigation into the murder of Emmett Till, a Black teenager from Chicago who was killed when he was accused of whistling at a white woman in Mississippi. By the way, years later, she even recanted and said even that hadn't happened. So the procedure was successful. Dr. Howard performed it. I really thought that would be the end of it and I'd go on. But word must have spread because someone else called. I made that arrangement and that was successful. And then word spread and someone else called. And then more and more women were calling. And I decided to make a system because I had learned about organizing from the civil rights movement. One movement is tied in with another. And we call the system Jane, so that if you called up for an abortion, you could ask for Jane. Over time, Dr. Howard was no longer involved. I found someone else. By the way, it turns out Dr. Howard had been arrested. I didn't know what happened. It turned out he had been running a clinic on 63rd Street in Chicago called Friendship Clinic. But I found someone else when he was out of touch because he had been arrested, whose name was Mike. And Mike we had the same terms that we had with Dr. Howard. The prices were cut. Originally it was $500. We went to 2 for the price of 1. We went to 3 for the price of 1. We went to for whatever the women can afford. And there were more and more people coming through. And then Mike needed help. Maybe there were even 100 women coming through a week. And so I recruited more and more people to be part of this group called Jane. Over time, by the way, there may have been 100 women who were in this service we call Jane. And over time, not only were there too many women for Mike to handle himself, but it turned out Mike wasn't a physician. And the women realized if Mike could do it, they could do it. And over time, next slide, the women of Jane learned how and performed 11,000 abortions themselves before Roe. Next slide. And so the women's movement was flowering. Telling the truth is very revolutionary. Standing up when we can, fighting back when there is a pushback, and joining together across race, across class, across background for a common shared purpose. We now know, next slide, that there's a pushback on reproductive freedom, this most intimate freedom, the most intimate decision of a person's life about when, whether, or how many children we'll have. And that, by the way, is an effective way to talk about abortion that people who are not yet committed may feel comfortable with. And we can say, I saw the figures that 1 in 5 people who can have a child will have an abortion. 1 in 5. That means it could be your sister, your friend, your neighbor, could be your mother. In fact, the majority of people who have abortions already have a child. They know what it means to have a child. And they've decided that that isn't the right time for them. And so there is a pushback and there is a fight back. Next slide. And there are organizations around the country. On the next slide, from Planned Parenthood and NARAL to Sister Song to women of color-led organizations to state abortion funds, and all of it needs our support. And we need your legitimacy, your validation. You play a key role in addition to the work and the services that you can provide. Because if we organize, we have changed this world. And when we organize, we will change this world. Next slide. Now, all the struggles I mentioned are interrelated. And we partly teach that through the training academy I had started called Midwest Academy. It was started in 1973 with money that I won from a back pay labor suit when I was fired for union organizing. And the unions are part of our effort too. Right now, there is greater support for unionization around the country than there may have been ever in my lifetime, with Amazon, with Starbucks, with the tech industries and others unionizing. We need to be in support of them too. Midwest Academy is a training center that trains and teaches people organizing. Next slide. There are 3 principles that we teach. One is that what we're fighting for are real improvements in people's lives. It's all about a moral goal of making lives better, just as you will be doing as physicians and providers. The second is to give people a sense of our power, of that people can realize they can win these victories themselves. It's not just a benevolent leader or administrator or executive who's making those decisions. And that's the direct action component. And the third is that we want to win a change of the relations of power and win structural reforms in the society. Now, all of this means we need to take the power we build and move it into elections on the next slide. Particularly now, when we are on a knife's edge in the challenge between democracy and tyranny, now is the time we need to register and vote and engage others in elections. And your involvement, AMS's involvement, really matters because elections have consequences. On the next slide, you'll see that this is the Republican Senate leadership and the Republican House leadership. It used to be that they were all white men, and now you've got at least one woman in each, but not a very diverse crew. And next slide. But there are leaders who we can elect, who represent us and represent the diversity of America. Nancy Pelosi, Congresswoman Cori Bush, Judy Chu, Congresswoman Judy Chu, Pramila Jayapal on the bottom left, who's head of the Progressive Caucus, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Jan Schakowsky, a congresswoman from Illinois, who is a co-chair of the focusing on women and reproductive rights also. And then LaToya Cottrell is the mayor in New Orleans, and Andre Dickens, the mayor in Atlanta. But there are thousands of leaders, and many of you might even consider, should you be running for office? Because after all, if the phony Dr. Oz is running in Pennsylvania, we can have real healthcare providers who really care about people running for office, encouraging others to run. Next slide. I said all our challenges, our struggles are unified, and so is the immigration reform struggle. I have down here from 1492. There's been an immigration reform struggle since 1492, when others came to the United States and this Western world. And there's particularly been a fight around DACA, the deferred action for childhood arrivals. DACA has been a transformative policy. It's allowed young immigrants to pursue their dreams in America. Of 825,000 people who arrived in the United States as children to live without fear of deportation. DACA is one of the things that we need to make permanent so that people do not live in fear day after day, year after year. And we need a pathway to citizenship for everyone. More than 3/4 of all people in this country support a pathway to citizenship for immigrant youth, regardless of political party. And the next slide. Here's one of the beautiful immigration demonstrations for a pathway to citizenship. This is the new America. And the next slide, and here is a slide. I showed a slide just before I was arrested in Mississippi. Here's an arrest for immigration reform. I was a strategic advisor to the immigration reform campaign. And the next slide, I've said again, all of our campaigns, all of our issues are connected. And the George Floyd murder was a sign with the resistance that came up from it and the names in the background of many of the others who were killed at the hands of the police. But there is a turnout, there is a response. And when we organize, we have a chance to make the change we want to see. On the next slide, we have to apply this particularly around abortion. There are now 26 states where abortion will be banned or restricted if Roe is overturned, as we expect it tragically may be by the Supreme Court, even before the end of the month. And you'll see the red states are the dark red are the ones where it may be banned. There are the trigger laws that will go into effect immediately. The pink ones where it'll be restricted. There are others where there's just no law about it. But then the blue ones are the sanctuary states. And it also means there will be safe havens. And we can create support for people from the states where it's not supported, for those where it is supported, with a new kind of underground. But we know the people who will be most harmed by this will be those without the resources, those who don't have either family support or financial resources, or the knowledge to know about where to travel, what providers to go to, how to get help. And so there will be people who will harm themselves or be harmed if this is turned illegal. You'll learn more about this at the Repro Summer Institute that I think Michael is going to talk about later. And your role within this new world we're anticipating is so important. On the next slide is publicity for this new movie that's on HBO called The Janes, that tells the documentary of the group that I described, that I had started in 1965. On the next slide. But there are many places to go to get the care we need. And here's abortionfinder.org, as well as some of the many organizations that build an abortion care network. Next slide. We also need to make sure we support the local abortion funds that are supporting providers, like many of you will be in the future. And the next slide. AMSA is playing a key role within this. Abortion is a reflection of our love and caring for others. And on the next slide, we come back to the main message that if we organize, we can change this world. When we organize, we have changed this world. And when AMSA organizes, you will change this world. I am so glad to be your partner, and I look so much forward to celebrating our future victories together. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was honestly an incredible talk. I have goosebumps running got chills all the way up and down my body. I can't speak enough to, I mean, every issue you talked about was impactful, from unions, especially relevant for medical students, where we have the unions in LA working to improve resident well-being. So I could go on about this forever, but I want to open it up to some of our other national leaders for questions. And I know Stephanie has a question she's very excited to ask you. So I'm going to have Stephanie, you can turn on your camera and unmute. And
I'd also welcome these wonderful, wonderful panelists to also raise their own comments. I wonder, Michael, or Pete, whoever's managing the slides, if we can go to the screen so that we can see all of our faces. And then do we go to gallery view so we can see all of our faces? Yes. So those who are watching, if you go up in the upper right-hand corner, and it looks like 9 little squares, if you click on it, you'll see one of them says gallery and full screen. Well, and thank all of you. You are the future. I'm now 76. I started organizing when I was in my early teens. And now is the time for you to take that torch and carry it forward. So Stephanie, I'm glad you've got your first comment or question, and I'm glad for the leadership that you provide.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you so much for your talk. Before I ask my question, I just have a quick comment. I had watched the HBO documentary, The Janes, last week when it first premiered. And there's several parts in the movie where they're flipping through the index cards. The index cards that you kept all the information for everyone that you helped and everyone that called Jane on. And it reminded me, my grandmother, who's no longer with us, used to run a abortion fund in California in the 90s and the 2000s. And she did the same thing. She kept the same type of information on index cards. And just seeing that in the movie just made me think, like, how many lives were changed by index cards?
By the way,
that was
a comment on the index cards. First of all, this was a pre-iPhone, pre-internet era. And also it was illegal. So we wanted to get some format that also was disposable. There was one day when I was given an alert, and the alert just meant danger. We didn't know, it was a signal, but we didn't know what the signal meant. Was someone harmed? Was there an arrest? We didn't know. And at that point, so I'm taking the index cards and going to the place where there was the meeting. This was an in-person meeting. Again, it was not, we didn't have virtual space. And I'm eating the index cards or ripping them up and throwing them into one wastebasket and then another wastebasket, eating some to make sure that there's no evidence that will be left.
fibrous.
Yes, it's a powerful part of the movie.
Yeah. So to my question, with the unfortunate impending demise of Roe v. Wade, abortion access has changed immensely since the foundation days of Jane. For the past 2 decades, we've had medication abortion, which is safe and effective through the first trimester and now accounts for over 50% of all abortions in the United States. The new Janes are organizations and individuals that mail abortion pills to people in need, especially in areas that do not have a health facility, a provider, or even in areas where the pills and self-managed abortion may be banned. But the issue is that many people don't know about medication abortion or how safe and effective self-management of your abortion is. So how do we educate people that the old images and ideas of coat hangers and using foreign objects no longer needs to represent the reality for those seeking abortion?
Truth is, Stephanie, that's a question I almost turned back to you. I'd love your ideas. AMSA is part of the answer. In fact, I like that. AMSA is part of the answer. Because you are the people who are trusted messengers. And you do have the social media capacity. In fact, I was told, let's see, it's Holly Spellman on the staff who manages, she said she does some of the emails and the social media. She was helping me out before we started on this call. And all of us, you can spread the word, and we need to, but also we need to force institutions to spread the word. Colleges, universities, schools, high schools, social service centers, PTAs, congregations, wherever people come together. We need to spread the word. What's tragic is that, and so we need to look for institutional changes. We also can ask cities and states to spread the word. Jane itself was a service. We can do what we can do on our own, but there needs to be institutional changes to deal with the scale that really needs to be addressed. And I know, Stephanie, that's something that you know quite well. The one other thing I'd say is that even with all the education that we can try, as we know from people who shared both false information around COVID and other issues, and also people who don't have access to current information, especially in states where Medicaid hasn't been expanded and where health information hasn't been expanded. I'm sure everyone on this call has seen the information that the mortality rates are increasing in the states where Medicaid was not expanded. Basically, in the red states, people are dying younger because they're not getting the care that they need. And so as much as we'll have to spread the word, and Stephanie, if you've got any other ideas on it, I really welcome your saying it. There will be many people who do not have this accessible. So we need to both provide the messaging and the information, spread the word, provide the services, which many of you will be doing. But we need to work for the institutional changes and organize, protest, and vote, and involve others in those systems. Stephanie, did you have any other ideas about how to spread the word?
I mean, what you said is what I do personally. Every time that I have a conversation about abortion with someone, I mention self-managed Medicaid abortion. At AMSACON, my poster was actually on self-managed abortion. I talk with everybody about it that will listen. I put it up on my Twitter handle all the time, on my Facebook, all over my social media. When I was at one of the latest protests, I was wearing my white coat and people were coming up to me and talking to me as a medical student. And there were a lot of individuals, especially older individuals that, remember pre-Roe and remember the coat hangers, the foreign objects. They didn't know that medication abortion now existed in the form of self-managed abortion too. And I just spent so much time educating them, hoping that then they will then carry on the message to others.
Yep.
So I think
Thank
it's
you.
just all
Thanks so
consuming.
much. I think Anna has a next question.
Yes, hi, Heather. Thank you so much again for being here. I'll echo what everyone else is saying, and we are just so thrilled to have you here. So I am really interested in the importance and the power that language has. And something that I have thought about recently is, I was wondering if you thought the pro-choice movement's focus on abortion as safe, legal, and rare, if that's counterproductive, in that it implies that limiting abortion is one of the goals, when the goal should be increasing access to abortion and celebrating its availability. You see all those graphs that's focused on how abortion rates are declining because other birth control methods are going up is the correlation you're supposed to make. But is that even something we should be looking at as something that is that how we should be celebrating how people's full reproductive rights, where abortion decline is mostly due to availability, and if it was on the rise, that should be great too. That means people have access to it.
So Anna, you've stated this all so well, and that yes, it needs to be safe, accessible to everyone, regardless of where you live, about what your financial background is, what your race is, what your faith is, but because people of all backgrounds will be looking for this. As I mentioned before, it had been 1 in 3 women. It's now it was 1 in 4. And then just this last week, they now say, Guttmacher Institute said it's 1 in 5 people who can have a child will have an abortion.
Yeah.
And so that's not rare. If a disease was hitting 1 in 5 people, you wouldn't say it's rare. It would be a national emergency. And what we need to make sure is that we create what we called in the civil rights movement a beloved community of support. And to acknowledge that it's not rare. Amongst the ways we now talk about it, by the way, that we have found are more effective, because there's 2 main things in talking about it. One is, I do think, to make people feel comfortable with this. So to make them not feel alone, but also to make them feel that it's familiar with them and encouraging their feeling that they're part of a broader community. So we now we're finding it's effective to talk about not so much choice, because there's some people who thought choice makes it sound like a superficial decision. Am I going to get red or blue? But in fact, this is the most here's some language that many have found of effective, and I'm sure you know this yourselves. It's the most intimate decision in a person's life about when, whether, and with whom we have a child. And this is the undermining, and we talk about it also as a freedom. I grew up thinking about rights, but many people think about freedom because this is part of an attack on our freedom. And in fact, if this Supreme Court, violating, by the way, the what they said during their sworn testimony, sworn under oath testimony when they were nominated, saying this was established law and they would not overturn not likely to overturn established law, when this was obviously in their minds all the time. That other than lying, other than going against the will of the vast majority of the country, 80% of this country believes that a politician should not get between a woman and her physician to make this most intimate decision of a person's life about when, whether, or with whom we have a child. And so your very point about how it's not rare. So the court is violating their own oath of office. They're the majority opinion of the country. It's not small d democratic, and it's not. It's also not the interpretation of a constitution. These are people who often argued against activist judges, but only when it was about the expansion of democracy and freedom do they want to then constrict and change the interpretations. So you are very right. It's not rare. It's part of a bigger struggle for freedom and democracy. And Anna, I'm glad you are part of the forces that will elevate this issue and ensure that there are providers to take care of people as they face this most intimate decision of our lives. Thanks so much, Anna.
Thank you so much.
And I think, Nikitha, were you going to raise the next question?
Yes, yes. And I just wanted to comment. I loved the piece about talking about our freedoms when we're also talking about abortion access and reproductive justice, because it's a fundamental freedom to our bodily autonomy that is under attack right now. And so I really love that piece of the discussion. I just wanted to comment on that. But yeah, my question is, how do you envision, through all of your experience with the Jane Collective and working with the medical establishment, how do you envision the medical community in this modern era most effectively leveraging our collective power, engaging in direct action, and working with others in the community to fight for abortion access and reproductive justice?
Nikitha, I'll give some answer, but I actually think you know a better answer than I do, because you are in the medical profession. I'm just a recipient of the medical profession. And believe me, I depend on many, many providers. Increasingly, it's one of the joys of aging. Obviously, there's medical care itself and providing a caring environment. You know, the first gynecologist I had a man gynecologist, would look down at me and then call in another male, I don't know, an assistant or another physician, come in, and then I'm there and say, oh, look at this, isn't that interesting? Oh, what do you think we should do with her? Oh, can we do this with her? As if I didn't even exist. And so having providers who are caring, who are understanding, who create a beloved community, not just providing physical care, but also emotional, mental, and social care, is very important. But then it's not just one provider being a good person yourself, it's getting others to be involved. And then using this entry point to share information, going back to Stephanie's question, share information. Do people know about other resources that are available? Sharing information that Anna just raised. This is not rare, and that there is a broader community. And then using your voice to validate. You know, I mentioned that Dr. Howard, TRM Howard, had been in this medical committee for human rights, the medical arm of the civil rights movement. Well, in some ways, AMSA is the future medical arm of the medical arm of the future of the progressive movement. And there are so many ways for you to be involved, validating your voices. I actually just sent Becky an email today from a friend of mine, whose name is Dr. Norbert Goldfield, who set up a thing called Ask Doctors and Nurses. And what he does is he recruits doctors and nurses and other medical professionals to be validators in elections, to say, this is the healthcare that we need. And here are choices you can make. And for some even saying, these are the healthcare providers. Just imagine this phony Dr. Oz is, I mean, the number of lies and fake information he's providing, but to have some medical professionals, not the candidates, say, now I've studied this and what he's saying, it's just not true, or whatever the facts of the matter really are. So your voice matters, your organizing matters, your entering and building a political power and a social power incredibly matters. Nikita, how would you answer your own question?
Yeah, I think there are so many ways that physicians can engage in advocacy. There's, power building, being strategic, and trying to advance certain health policies, certain bills, the legislation that's going on right now. And then, of course, direct action, actually providing abortion care and being patient-centered, being trauma-informed, all of these things. It's a marriage of, and it's an intersection of different advocacy methods. So I think you touched on that as well.
Well, all three of you so far, Anna, Nikita, Stephanie, I'm so heartened to know you are the future providers. I wonder if Oak or Avanthi have a question or a comment to make.
Yeah, I definitely have a question. First off, Heather, thank you so much for your talk. It's just super inspiring to hear what you were able to organize during times of that just brought up so many challenges and barriers to what is an essential healthcare service. My question to you relates to some of these legislative proposals that just don't have any medical basis or evidence. I feel like as medical trainees, as a current resident, my whole medical training was based on looking at the literature and using scientific trials to help guide the medical decisions that we propose or offer to our patients. And when we're hearing these different legislative proposals of things that just don't make sense, like reimplanting an ectopic pregnancy, one that's a medical emergency and has really no medical basis behind it, and you have these politicians who are saying this and these ideas that are getting spread like wildfire, and I find myself feeling so, I guess, discouraged at times when we're here learning the medicine. We know what we're talking about. We're getting trained in this work. And then we have these folks who have a platform and are able to spread all this, like terrible medical advice. And I just wonder if you have any suggestions or advice on how we can tackle that in a way that actually helps advance public health.
Well, it sounded to me like you just tackled it, that saying what you are saying, but that's the key. It's the saying it. It's not just knowing it, or thinking someone needs to say it. But Avanthi, part of what makes me hopeful about what our future does hold is because you will be saying it, and not just you. You'll be training others how to say it. You'll be training others how to use our voice. That's why with Michael's leadership at AMSA, that AMSA is the answer. But Avanthi, how do you think it can be addressed, particularly when we're facing issues of criminalizing this relatively safe medical procedure?
I mean, definitely, yeah, getting out in the media, talking to our legislators. I think I've tried to do some organizing at my own institution, and some days some days go better than others. I think more recently, I feel like I've run into the struggle where there are folks who understand the gravity of the issue, understand that this is an important issue, but may not be willing to stick their necks out when we really have to say something about changing a policy within our own clinics or how we're practicing. And that's, oh gosh, that burns my soul sometimes.
You know, what you've just said is so important. I mentioned this at the start of my comments. So much of the society tells us we're not good enough. You don't know enough. You're not smart enough. You're not enough. But in fact, we are more than enough. I think it was Gloria Steinem who said, we are the leaders we have been waiting for. But it's not time to wait. It's time to raise our voices. Often it's very hard to do it alone, and it may not be as effective doing it alone. So it's not just showing I'm bold, I'm brave. I've actually been scared in almost every event I've been doing. Last night, Becky will tell you, I called her up. I was scared about talking to AMSA. I had been running and doing other things, and I called Becky and I said, what is it? Remind me, what do we need to do? What will it look like? It can be scary doing almost anything, but we don't do it alone. Just as Becky Martin held my virtual hand, we hold each other's hands. We hold each other up, and we hold up half the sky. That was one of the phrases of the women's movement. So Avanthi, your question of finding our own voices and finding the strength together. And I do think it's probably what Michael will describe in the later on in the training programs that you're going to run about how you do it. We don't end up in the world naturally knowing how to do it. It's part of what Midwest Academy trains. But we can learn. And when we organize, that is the way we change the world. So Avanthi, does that partly address your question?
That does. Thank you so much.
And Oak, was there a comment or a thought you wanted to share?
Yes, thank you. I'll echo what everyone else has said. We appreciate you so much for being here and speaking. I have a question for you that you can answer as brief as you want. I was wondering, in the modern day with so much surveillance from our technology around us and just different, I watched the documentary on HBO about the Janes, and it seems like maybe some of your efforts were ignored because it was benefiting people in power. Would you think that a similar situation will happen after Roe versus Wade gets repealed by the Supreme Court? Would you be willing, in theory, would you be willing to do something like the Janes again? Do you think that that would be a good idea for people who feel compelled to take direct action?
Really, that's a question for the next generation. It's a question for all of you to decide. Now, remember, I got involved not out of an act of civil disobedience. Just as the first time I was arrested, I didn't think I was doing civil disobedience. I thought I was helping people register to vote. And when I started what became Jane, I thought I was helping a friend in need. I was following a moral direction. And then I decided to do what was needed. And so many things are needed. There'll be people who are above ground and who'll be running centers. Let's see, who is it who is in, Avanthi is in North Carolina, she said before we started the show. And she said how the numbers are increasing and increasing because people are coming from other states. So even above ground, more services will be needed. And it's not just what we can do, but getting the institutions to commit to provide those services. And then there'll be some who say, okay, well, we're providing transportation and housing and the medical support itself. But then how do you address people in Texas where not only are they criminalizing abortion, they're creating an authoritarian dictatorship where you get a bounty system to turn in your neighbor, your friend, your cousin, your mother, if they are involved in arranging an abortion. $10,000. And then Oklahoma, I understand, was considering $100,000. I mean, I thought that this was you turn in your neighbor, you report on someone else. It actually, I thought, only happened in other places. But in the face of that, there will be people who either fight back directly and publicly, and some who fight back in an underground. So all levels, the above ground, the visible underground, the legal underground, and then the standing up to illegitimate authority, if those can stand, or sitting down, or being present in the face of illegitimate authority. So Oak, I think when you asked the question, you also, in a way, you knew and implied the answer. Is there anything else you would like to add about it?
No, I think that you spoke very gracefully on that, and I appreciate your insight and thought into it.
And the one thing I would say, not to romanticize civil disobedience and not to romanticize organizing. The truth is, much of it is dull and boring. One more day of talking to one more person. I've said this already. I'm saying it again. I'm bored, but someone else may not have heard it yet. And it's not that our goal is to be arrested. That actually was not my goal. My goal was to help someone in need. The truth is, I didn't want to be arrested. I'm so law-abiding. I cross at the green, not in between. I don't litter. I recycle. But sometimes we need to respond to illegitimate authority. It was true on voting rights. It was true on abortion. For me, it was true on immigration, on climate, on money and politics, on labor struggles. Those are all places against the war in Vietnam. They're all places in which I've been arrested in the past, but it's one tactic. Many things are needed, and many people will feel comfortable doing different things, and they're all good. I wonder, we're just about to end, so maybe I will just thank you now, and thank from Stephanie, Anna, Nikitha, Avanthi, Oak, to thank Pete, who handled the slides, Holly, Jeff, Alaya, and Michael. Thank you for your leadership in this wonderful organization. Please thank Becky for the work that she's done. And I'm grateful for your including me at this point. And I look forward to hearing about the answers you provide in the future. And if we organize, what can we do? If we organize,
change the world.
We can change the world. Thank you for changing the world. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Heather. I think we all could have talked to Heather just about all night, but unfortunately Heather is popular and had prior engagements. So we will stop there. Before I move on to talk about the Institute, because Heather had talked so much about voter registration, I did also just want to throw a little bit of a plug for our Met Out the Vote campaign in partnership with Vote ER. If you're not registered to vote or you're not sure, go to vote.health AMSA National to check or to register as an absentee voter, which I just re-registered. So I actually need to go do that. So I'm going to do that as soon as I'm done with this. But back to our reproductive health. We are getting close to closing our applications for our Abortion Care and Reproductive Justice Institute for summer 2022. They're still on a rolling basis, so you can still apply, but seats are limited. With this, you can get together with a bunch of other medical students who are interested in learning about abortion, learning how to advocate for our patients, hear from policymakers around abortion, hear from abortion providers, hear from patients, learn sort of how we can, as medical students and as future physicians, how we can make a difference in our patients' lives. I'm personally signed up. I'm sure several of the people on this call are also signed up. It's really going to be an excellent experience talking about the overlap of abortion and student wellness and the overlap with environmental health, because really abortion impacts every aspect of health. So if you're interested in signing up for the Institute, go to amsa.org/RHP and apply as soon as possible. And if we can go to the next slide, we have our next live stream event, which is also going to be amazing, with Liz Weinstead and the Abortion Access Front. This will be on Monday, so just a few days away, at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be live streaming it essentially the same way. So if you're interested to sign up, go to go.amsa.org/repro/live stream. For those of you who don't know Liz Winstead, she is one of the founders of The Daily Show with Jonathan Stewart and I guess now Trevor Noah. So they're a comedian. They're going to put on a great show talking about or using comedy to talk about abortion and dispel some of the myths. And so I know I'm personally really looking forward to that. I think of myself as a funny person, but I'm not nearly as funny as them. So you'll definitely want to come listen to them talk about abortions. And so since we're just about at 9 p.m. Eastern time, I think that's it for us. Thank you so much again to Heather Booth for coming and talking to us and hearing the medical student perspective on abortions and how we can increase access for our patients. So with that, I will end it and we'll see you all on Monday. Thanks.